Hello and welcome to the radiotimes.com Doctor Who podcast. My name's Hugh.
My name's Morgan.
And this week we're here to review a Doctor Who episode. Yes, it's like we're back in Jan/Feb/March 2020, albeit slightly more at home, because there's a new episode of Doctor Who out which we can talk about. Specifically, we're talking about Revolution of the Daleks, the New Year's Day special, which came out on January 1st, 2021. Morgan, do you want to give us a little pressy for where we find ourselves at the beginning of the episode?
Sure. So, having become separated at the end of the last series, the Doctor and her companions, they have been torn apart. So the Doctor finds herself in space prison and has been there for an unspecified amount of time, but certainly a long, long time, decades, while her companions have been, her fam, have been stuck on Earth for around 10 months and are very grumpy about it, considering the Doctor has been locked away for far, far longer.
I thought that was odd. I mean, she never says, for me, it's been like, at least 19 years, possibly like 100 years or something, right? Oh, 10 months, tough.
Yeah. And I know time passes differently probably for Time Lords. They have a different sense of time, but all the same, like, come on, Yaz, like, rein it in a little bit. So, yeah, so that's happening. How will the Doctor escape? We'll get onto that. Meanwhile, as teased by Chris Chibnall and Matt Strabbins, Revolution of the Daleks serves as a sequel of sorts to Resolution, the last outing for the Daleks, and we see what fate befell the Recon Dalek and how it allowed, as predicted, as theorized, the British government to develop its own man-made Dalek drones.
Yes. I mean, we were pretty spot on there, right? Like, we kind of talked about this before in a couple of podcasts.
Yeah, not to brag, but...
yeah, we kind of guessed that this was going to be like, here's the ruins of the old Dalek, we'll make a new Dalek, and, maybe... I can't remember if... Yeah, I think we said they might clone them. I mean, the thing that I didn't expect was the whole thing with the Dalek mutant clone being conscious and kind of making the other Daleks. That kind of made it made sense for like why they'd all turn evil. I was kind of missing that piece in our theory, but
yeah. I mean, Dalek mutants now have all kinds of powers that we never knew about. They can control minds. They can apparently teleport while under ultraviolet light. Shoot laser beams.
Whatever you want. Yeah. So. That's kind of where we're at. Yeah, basically the British government is building these Daleks, specifically Robertson, played by Chris Noth, who's back, for the technology minister, Joe Patterson, played by Harriet Walter, who then becomes Prime Minister. And yeah, they're making these Daleks. Robertson doesn't actually know what he's making. The fan kind of realise what's going on. But first they have to kind of talk Yaz into helping out. And I feel like one of the things we should talk about at start, because it kind of pops up quite early on in the episode, is this is quite an interesting episode for Yaz, I think. Like, they've really leaned into the whole Mandip, Gill, Jodie Whittaker relationship, which obviously makes a lot of sense because Bradley Walsh and Tosin Cole are leaving. So you kind of need to be like, what's for Doctor and Yaz now? I mean, Jodie Whittaker said the next series is The New Adventures of the Doctor and Yaz in Doctor Who magazine. She's described it as that. So we kind of very much see Yaz as the kind of like, she's the person trying to track down the Doctor again, a little bit like Donna, but with more post-its. We kind of have it. She's been sleeping in that TARDIS. Is she trying to make the TARDIS work? Is that what she's kind of doing?
I think it's, yeah, at certain points she's talking about that they've tried to make the TARDIS work and they can't figure it out. Yeah, no, it's interesting with Yaz. It kind of foreshadows the fact that she's going to stick around and that Ryan and Graham don't, because Yaz has clearly not let go of the Doctor. She hasn't moved on in those 10 months. She's still very much obsessing over the Doctor and her time with the Doctor. Whereas Ryan has very much moved on. Like, in those 10 months, he's kind of moved on from his time spent on the TARDIS. He's built kind of a new life for himself on Earth, or rediscovered his old life. And although I'd say his exit is maybe explored in a little more detail, like his reasons for leaving, than Graham's, which I'm sure we'll get onto. But it does feel like, even from their first scene, it feels like those two have gone back to living their old lives, or at least slightly different versions of their old lives. But they're comfortable back on Earth, whereas Yaz still has kind of itchy feet. She can't let go of the life she once led.
I mean, to be honest, we've said it before on this podcast, it always kind of felt like Graham and Ryan were a bit ambivalent about the whole travelling in space and time thing anyway.
Yeah.
Like, Graham was sort of vaguely enjoying it, and Ryan seemed a bit put out to be travelling as well. So I think it kind of makes sense for what we know about those characters. And it is interesting because it kind of foregrounds Yaz as being kind of more like a Rose figure, like this character who really wants to be there, who really is, kind of full of wonder and stuff. And I'm kind of really interested to see how they do that. Like, we've never really had Yaz as she's always been a main character, but not yet as like the co-lead on the show. And I feel like I'm kind of interested to see what they do with that. Obviously, though,
it's interesting as well because we thought that maybe with the fam stuck on Earth, Captain Jack was going to arrive and interact more directly with them and serve as a sort of doctor substitute figure. But that doesn't happen. What actually happens is, with Ryan and Graham being a lot more kind of complacent, Yaz almost takes the doctor role early on for a few scenes at least. She's definitely sort of the driving force, saying, "No, come on, we've got to do this, we've got to do that." She kind of takes charge of that trio.
Well, there's that bit where she directly says, "It doesn't work when I say it." Do you know what I mean? Like, she says something that the doctor would say and has said, I think, and it doesn't work. And I think there's Doctor Who has a fun little vein of that. Like, there's a bit of a running sort of thing in Torchwood where Jack does something that the Doctor has done and he's seen him do, and it doesn't work for him. Like, he gives an ultimatum and it doesn't work in Children of Earth. He tries to forgive his enemy in Exit Wounds, and it doesn't work like it did with the Master. So I think there's kind of a thread of that. The thing I'd say about that, and I'd say about that section in general, is I think that they've got a really interesting setup for this episode, which is the Doctor in prison, the fam on Earth. And I do think that they move on from that very quickly. So I mean, people watching will know this, but in the sort of build up to this episode, we're very much told about, what we were told about this episode is kind of dealt with in about the first 10, 15 minutes. Do you know what I mean? Like, the whole Doctor in prison, what are these Daleks, the fam trying to self-us on Earth. Like, the Doctor gets back to them very quickly. And I do think it's kind of a shame, because I actually think the scenes of the Doctor in prison, I think, were some of my favourites in the episode. I thought it was really interesting. I loved seeing the classic monsters, or not even classic, I suppose. I mean, they're sort of classic modern monsters, if that makes sense. Like, so we got a Weeping Angel again, which is great. It's the first time we've seen the Weeping Angels. I think we technically saw some in Heaven Sent. No, Hellbent. We saw some in Hellbent. And I think that's been it. So that's about 5 years ago. And obviously you see a Sycorax of all things.
Yeah.
But Sycorax and the Ood, but on embarking on a kind of life of crime together is a series I want to watch. How did that happen?
Or listen to Big Finish.
Yeah, Big Finish, obligatory mention. You get the Pating back. You've got you see some Silent. That was, I think, one of the best gags of the episode. I forgot you were there. You actually do see him. Because I went back through again. You do see him. Again, like in the first scene where she sees the Weeping Angels, like you can see Silent in the background.
I didn't spot him in that first scene, or maybe I did, and I just forgot.
But yeah, I'm sure loads of fans are going to be combing through. There's that one big wide shot where I think you can see like a Skithra sort of scorpion thing, and you can see maybe a Varga plant. I don't know, and maybe a Cyberman. It's hard to say, but I think people will be having a look through and seeing what they. But I thought that was all really fun, and I think the idea of the fam kind of trying to manage on their own is quite an interesting one. It's a vein that they've sort of tapped a little bit before in things like Spyfall, but yeah, it's kind of interesting. But it goes very quickly. The Doctor, you feel like you're about to go to another montage of the Doctor's prison life, and then Jack's just there, and Jack immediately breaks her out, like with this magic ball of magic that he is carrying around with him, and then they're just out and they're fine.
Yeah, which I have to say, like, I guess it's because you had the big, grand secret at the time reintroduction of Jack in Fugitive of the Judoon. You had the brilliant reintroduction where you hear his voice and you're like, is it? And then he appears and you missed me, right? And you have the big moment.
And it was a big surprise for people as well. Like, it was genuinely a secret they kept pretty well.
It was a brilliant, huge surprise and sort of played with the right level of drama. And here, I guess it's because we know Jack is coming back, so it's not played as a surprise, which is fair enough. But it's still quite a grand moment, I think. The Doctor and Jack reuniting, and he's just sort of there, which it's like I don't. That scene is odd, as fantastic as it is to have him back, and he's immediately, John Barrowman is immediately just throws himself back into the role brilliantly. The way in which that scene is played is quite odd. Like, the Doctor just sort of turns around and Jack is there. There's no no grand reveal.
Exactly. It kind of just like it kind of comes out of nowhere almost, like that he's there. Like, I'm not sure how you would have done it differently is the weird thing, but I can sort of see, like, like the thing with the knocking of the cell, like maybe if there was more build up and like, like it took a bit longer. I just feel like they wanted the Doctor out of prison and they got her out very quickly. I feel like maybe I could have done with a third, outing. Like, maybe she got a message, that second little sequence, and sort of mysterious, and like, what's that about? Go back to Earth, and then Jack comes a bit later. I don't know, but then I guess it's quite a long episode anyway, 70 minutes, so maybe they just wanted to get to the point. But yeah, it's quite funny how, like, I remember when the episode was first kind of being teased, they released a couple of photos of like the TARDIS team on their own, And we now know that those scenes were like literally the scene where the Doctor comes back. Like the bit where they're all standing there looking a bit gormless is literally the scene that, because the TARDIS is arriving back, because the Doctor's back. And it is interesting. I mean, the thing, sorry, just to go back to the Jack thing as well, actually, I missed something there. It was weird because for the Doctor, obviously, it's just Jack. Do you know what I mean? You kind of just have those characters together again. And we have seen that before with moving from Christopher Eccleston to David Tennant. I do think it was a little better handled with Christopher Eccleston, David Tennant, like the way they kind of, it felt like a bigger deal, Jack coming back in that episode, even though that episode, Utopia, was kind of about the Master. This episode, you feel like could have been more about Jack being there, whereas actually Jack felt kind of like he just turned up in a way that it's sort of weirdly like he does in The Stolen Earth, when he's part of a much bigger ensemble, but where he'd been around quite recently. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, Doctor Who does famously sort of eat through ideas. That's why part of why it's so great is that it kind of, what would be the sole hook for another show is but one of Doctor Who's many ideas that it's throwing about. And you know, this episode does have a lot going on. So you could have had a whole episode where the Doctor's locked away and the fam are trying to work without her on Earth. You could have had a whole episode dedicated to Captain Jack. You could have just done a whole episode about man-made Daleks. You could have just done a whole episode about a Dalek civil war, and indeed Doctor Who has done a whole story or multiple stories about Dalek civil wars. So yeah, it's great. I think that there's so much going on in this episode. Again, it's incredibly fast-paced. You're not likely to get bored, but I do think maybe some of those ideas aren't quite given the breathing room that they deserved.
You could have even done an episode just about Robertson coming back. Do you know what I mean? Like he's sort of like because you know he's a big character, like, and it's interesting that he's sort of become a sort of recurring villain of the Jodie Whittaker era, and he's just some guy.
Well, I think as much as I enjoyed the character the first time around, I think he works better here because Chris Noth is obviously having just a wonderful time, which and so his enthusiasm is infectious. But also, Arachnids in the UK, the character kind of pivots between being a genuinely loathsome villain and comic relief, and I think here the way in which he's portrayed, he's more just that villain you love to hate. I think they get the character right, the tone of the character right. Like he's never really despicable. I mean, he is, the things he does are, but in terms of how we feel about him as an audience, we don't hate Robertson. He's quite fun to have around, which I think is why he's being set up potentially as a recurring villain. Like the episode very much is open-ended. He could come back again, because not entirely clear why, but because there's just a cut and it appears the Doctor let him go again, and now he's riding high and he's on course for a knighthood and everyone loves Robertson. Not entirely sure why the Doctor let him go, but I think it's just because he's too much fun to have around as a character.
And she's like, no, we're going to need someone to jazz this place up now. Obviously we should talk a little bit about what Robertson is actually up to. He basically stole the broken Dalek from Resolution, as we said, and had Leo Rugazzi, played by Nathan Stewart-Jarrett, and his company kind of rebuild the Dalek from the ground up. And Leo also, just for fun, cloned a Dalek, which is never a good move. I would say, talking of the guest cast, I was a little disappointed by how little we saw of Harriet Walter as the Prime Minister, because she basically has a few scenes with Chris Noth and then she gets killed. And I was a little bit like, oh, okay. Then it reminded me of when Stephen Fry was in Spyfall. Like, you kind of feel like they could have used them a bit more, especially because Harriet Walter was just such a great actor. And then Nathan Stewart-Jarrett, I was a little sad because I think he's a really, really great actor. I really loved him in Misfits and stuff. And I think he actually does really well. He's sort of following in Charlotte Ritchie's footsteps as the possessed Dalek person. But he's gone relatively quickly, at least relatively quickly in the story. I think he's, within the first half hour or so. And I was a bit like, it kind of would have been nice to sort of see him, I don't know, carry on. I mean, it's already a very big cast. But I was kind of thinking, I just kind of wish we'd seen a little bit more of him. I don't know. Maybe that's just...
Yeah, me. I think again, this story burns through a lot of great ideas and a lot of great characters and performers very quickly. Again, it's that Doctor Who approach of, I think that's always been a little bit of an issue with Doctor Who. Not always, but it's happened before quite a bit, that where guest cast, you have these brilliant big names in. Stephen Fry's a great example, and they don't always have as much screen time as you would like, because you've only got 45 minutes to an hour, and there's multiple guest cast and at the moment quite a large lead cast as well, and you've just got to keep the story moving constantly. So they kind of pop up, do their little turn, and then they're gone, rather than it being a showcase necessarily for these brilliant actors.
Yeah. Still, they do get to do their bit, bring the Daleks back. And like I said, I do think it's quite interesting how they bring the Daleks back. I think it's quite a fun idea. We sort of talked before about it being a reverse victory of the Daleks, where they actually have created Daleks on Earth. I think that's quite a fun idea. The idea of humanity kind of accidentally making loads of Daleks and just unleashing them. I will say, like, it was a little, I had to suspend my disbelief a little bit that everyone would be like, oh yeah, these massive sort of ominous looking robots. Yeah, that's not an issue for, like, freedom of expression or, right to protest. We'll just have them around.
Yeah.
And also, to be honest, I was mainly distracted by the sci-fi, world of large crowds and people at the airport.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe what we need is Daleks enforcing social distancing.
Yeah.
Wear your mask, it goes over your nose. But no, I like the idea of the drone Daleks. I must admit, I laughed out loud during the first demonstration where they have a sort of water gun, like a Dalek with a water pistol. That was fun. Yeah, no, I think it's a fun twist on the Daleks, definitely.
I think the thing with the Daleks in this storyline, and there is more to talk about with them, is I did feel like, I wrote this in my preview, not that they were underused exactly, but it's interesting how much more of the episode, when I'm thinking about the episode, I'm thinking more about the characters. Do you know what I mean? The Daleks are there because they are quite a faceless threat, I suppose. And because last time we just had that one Dalek, which is very focused. With this, it's kind of like the Daleks are the threat, but you're kind of thinking more about, Ryan and, like, wanting to leave and, Yaz being upset. That's kind of more the drama, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I mean, Daleks, I think they're less powerful the more of them there are, because they become a bit more faceless. So when you have just the one Dalek, like in Dalek, the 2005 episode, or like in Resolution, you can sort of drill down a bit more onto that one Dalek, and it becomes more of a character. Whereas when you have, as much as fans love to see Daleks attacking en masse, they do become a bit more of a characterless, faceless mob. I think what stops them from being totally faceless or voiceless, I don't know what I'm driving at, but I think again it is that performance from Nick Briggs, who kind of he creates a clear distinction between different types of Daleks, and really gives them a kind of a soul and a character.
I did find it quite interesting how different they managed to make these Daleks are, because one of the things that happens in the episode, obviously, is that we kind of get the bronze/gold Daleks back. And then that kind of reminds you that they are quite different. Like, the voices are quite different of these black Daleks, and the whole light up red thing and shooting red lasers, I thought was quite cool. Like, it was just an interesting way to differentiate them. And it kind of made me wish that we had more, like, rival versions of Daleks. Like, I know we briefly had the the new Paradigm Daleks and the Bronze Daleks. We've got to have a better name for them, the Bronze Daleks. Someone's got to come up with, like, a sci-fi name for it. Like, have a sink plunger becomes the manipulator arm. You know what I mean? It's got to be a name. But anyway, the Bronze Daleks, sort of seeing how they compare, it's quite interesting, because obviously the black ones are a little bit taller but thinner, and they've just got that slightly more plasticky kind of human-made sheen. But then obviously still similar.
But the bronze ones that feature in this episode aren't just regular old Daleks anyway. They're Death Squad Daleks.
That's true.
Like SAS Daleks. So the episode not only does it introduce the man-made Daleks, but you also have another kind of variant of Dalek, which I agree. I enjoy that when you get twists, like when you get the new Paradigm, when you get Imperial versus Renegade, when you get a special weapons Dalek. I think you never want to, as many people have said, you never want to stray too far from that iconic design and that voice and that, because that's what makes a Dalek work. But it is fun sometimes, as well as maintaining that, to throw in a few new twists on a Dalek.
Definitely. We should say that the reason that the Doctor brings these Daleks in is hilarious. It's very much similar to, I sent you a link to it. There's a Simpsons episode where they're like overrun by, I can't remember what it is, some sort of animal. So they get all these snakes to cut, all these lizards to come and eat all the insects, and then they get some horrible snakes to come and eat the lizards, and then it's like, but then we have these snake-eating mountain gorillas we'll bring in, and it's like, but the gorillas are even worse. They go, but that's the beauty of it, Lisa. Wintertime rolls around, the gorillas simply freeze to death. And it did feel a bit like that. It's like, oh no, we've got all these Daleks, around the Earth. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to bring more Daleks that are worse and have a big spaceship. And then the thing that struck me again watching this now is that then the Doctor works out what to do with those Daleks, which I think is I actually thought was quite a neat and clever idea for how to get rid of the Daleks. But I was like, you could have done that with the first lot.
That's a good point. Yeah, because I actually like the twist, how it folded in the spare TARDIS, because a lot of people were like, is there just a TARDIS on Earth now? Is that just going to stay there? But this episode does deal with that quite neatly, and it all plays a part in the climax. But yeah, could she not have just done that with the drone Daleks? Good, good point.
Possibly. I mean, I don't know. Maybe they wouldn't have fallen for it. Maybe they wouldn't have been as desperate to get the Doctor.
Yeah,
Who knows?
I also think it's quite handy that apparently the Death Squad Daleks don't care about humans. They're specifically these are Daleks specifically designed to root out impurities in other Daleks or something.
I've said
fine.
it before.
So they won't exterminate any humans.
They're like the copyright investigators. They're like, this is a breach. This is a breach of our trademark design. How dare you? Yeah, and I thought the visual of them all sort of filing into the TARDIS like that was very cool. It actually reminded me a lot of in Doomsday. You know, when they have that Dalek prison ship.
Yeah.
And they all come flying out, which I always loved as an image. I think seeing it kind of in reverse, I wouldn't be surprised if that was intentional. Seeing it in reverse and then seeing that TARDIS kind of folded on itself, I thought that was such a cool visual. I think actually, to be fair, the special effects in this episode are really on point. Like the way you see these new Daleks flying around with the red, and the new ones, the new old ones, if that makes sense, look pretty great as well. But there is something I have to address, which I have written about on the website as well. These bronze Daleks, they're missing something important. They don't have sink plungers. So when they brought in the Resolution Dalek, which is kind of man-made, it had little claws, I was like, oh, interesting. You know, I guess the plunger would look a bit silly, you know, how would he have made that? Then when this new Daleks, you know, come in, the black ones, I'm like, oh, okay, well, look, these ones don't have a plunger either, but that's, you know, they're built from the other one. They're man-made, it's fine. Then these ones come in, which look the same as the ones we've seen before, but they don't have a plunger. I'm like, is the production team trying to, you know, whitewash Doctor Who history, pretend the Daleks don't have two kits and implements as opposed to one? I mean, there's the argument that these are Death Squad SAS Daleks who maybe don't have them because the manipulator arm is for nerds or whatever. But I was interested by that. It was just something I noticed when I was watching. I was like, oh, that one hasn't got a thing. Because we've done that before, like in Journey's End, there were a few on Davros's sort of bit of the ship who had little twisty things instead of arms. But
I think again, it's one of those things that it's fine to, you know, to tweak Daleks and give them, you know, different modifications and that kind of thing. But I don't think you want to stray too far from the original design. And for me, the sink plunger like has to stay, or it has to make a comeback. Like I'm fine with it to be absent for this one outing. But I think long term, got to bring back the sink plunger. I mean, come on, you've got to. Like, I know it's kind of silly, but Doctor Who's kind of silly. Like, removing the sink plunger does not make Daleks any less ludicrous. Like,
yeah, it's one of those things where I was also wondering if, like, were they kind of anticipating, like, wanting to kind of move away from some of the gags? But I feel like people have kind of moved on from that gag anyway, because, you know, they made the sink plunger scary in the revived series, where it's killed a few people. You know, it's sort of sucked their faces off to death. So yeah, no, I mean that was a small caveat I had. I will say, like, as with the latter years of Peter Capaldi and everything, the way they sort of burnish these bronze Daleks to look all really nice and shiny is something I appreciate and enjoy.
No, I was just gonna say that. Yeah, no, I agree. They look great, and I'm glad to see them back in this episode. But I also think, in a way, it's a shame that we're never going to see those drone Daleks again, because I actually really like how they look. I love the red light, the red lasers, as you say. Not so keen on the drone Dalek voices, I must admit.
They're a little different, weren't they? They're sort of a bit kind of gravelly in a weird sort of way.
They sound a bit more Smash Robot to me, which I can imagine Twitter would have exploded when they first heard those Dalek voices and go, is that what Daleks sound like now? And it's like, no, it's fine. The bronze ones are coming back and they sound the same as they ever did. But no, I you know, like I say, I think there's room for all manner of Daleks. And I think it would be a shame if we never see the drone Daleks again.
I agree. I mean, well, you never know. Maybe they'll bring back the old one. I mean, maybe they'll have a different type of Dalek every time they bring the Daleks back. That's currently the theme over the last couple of years. I wouldn't mind. But yeah, so obviously the Daleks end up getting defeated. You know, there's a bit of like mystery and action before that. Robertson, you know, tries to sort of go over to them, blah, blah, blah. But we're kind of all just getting to the end point because we kind of know where this episode's going. So first, before the kind of big emotional exits, we have Captain Jack's exit after being in the episode, kind of having a little heart-to-heart with Yaz that kind of prefigures, you know, what could happen to her. Jack just sort of leaves off screen.
And again, like the period where John Barrowman was in this episode, loved it. Like I say, he immediately recaptures that kind of classic Doctor Who version of Jack, which is, as he said, slightly different to the Torchwood version of Jack, where Jack has the weight of the world on his shoulders, or the weight of Cardiff on his shoulders, and he has a team to lead, and he's slightly more straight-laced and serious. But that sort of maverick, happy-go-lucky, quippy version of Jack that we all love, he recaptures it perfectly. I really loved the moments that he has on his own with Yaz, where they talk about what the Doctor means to them and their own relationships with the Doctor. Fantastic. But not only is his entrance into the episode quite lacking in drama, but he doesn't even get a goodbye scene, which is odd. Like, there's no like, see you later, Doctor, and salute. He's just sort of not there. Like, he's written out off screen, and then it's just he just goes, "Oh, sorry, had to dash. Back to see Gwen. Cheers." Yeah, slightly odd.
It is odd. I mean, it's. I'm glad they sort of added in. I can't be sure of this, but I suspect that the scene where he calls the Doctor might have been added later on, because when Jodie Whittaker replies, you don't see her face at any point, if that makes sense. So I think they might have added it in with additional dialogue recording. But I did like the Torchwood nod. I thought that was fun. I think it was a nice thing to do. The fact that Jack said, "Oh, I'm going to stay on Earth for a while. I'm going to reconnect with Gwen." That's like a big bone thrown to the Torchwood fans, I think. Like, whether you're listening to the Big Finish series or not, it's like kind of, it's, if not a hint that Torchwood the series could come back, because that's still seems a bit unlikely. Although we would have said the same about Jack being in Doctor Who again once, and did, I think, on this podcast within this year. But yeah, it's also a bit like, I guess it's kind of like, even if Torchwood the series isn't coming back, you could imagine Torchwood as an organisation, or as that duo of Jack and Gwen, or Dave Miles being there, and being possibly in Doctor Who if Jack's still on Earth. And the fact he's saying, "Oh, I'll call you," like, that's kind of setting him up to come back, if not, right away in the next series, but at some point, right?
Yeah, it's nice to have an acknowledgement that character of Gwen is still out there, that we know what Jack's going to do next. And because Jack doesn't get a grand farewell in this episode, I don't know, maybe that is intentional. Maybe this is but the first of many future appearances for John Barrowman and Doctor Who, and maybe next time he'll bring Eve Miles with him. That
would be so cool. I mean, I think I'd really like that. I think it would be nice to kind of bring that together. And who knows? I mean, we do know that at the moment, that when they were filming Series 13, John Barrowman was still in America, so possibly not right away, but you never know.
Could have been something they planned. And then had to ditch because
I wondered about that. Yeah.
Everything that's happening in the world.
Yeah, well, fingers crossed he'll come back at some point. It would be nice to see him again. It'd be nice to kind of see him a bit more depth. It's also worth saying that this Torchwood thing is kind of a bit of a personal note for Chris Chibnall, who wrote the episode, because he was the head writer of Torchwood for a number of years, and wrote a lot for Eve Miles and John Barrowman. So it's kind of like, it's a little bit thing of his as well. He's quite connected to Torchwood compared to, even more so than, like, certainly more so than Stephen Moffat was, and about as much as Ross Davis was. So yeah, it's a nice little thing. But yeah, Jack doesn't get an exit scene, but we do get one for Ryan and Graham, although arguably more so for Ryan. Throughout the episode, Ryan's basically clearly a bit like, kind of moved on from this. He's kind of like,
one foot in, 1 foot out.
Yeah. One foot out the door of the TARDIS. He and the Doctor have a bit of a heart-to-heart in the middle of the episode, talking about the Timeless Child stuff, and basically Ryan decides he wants to stay. I mean, the funny thing is that I think when previous companions have gone, they've either been like pulled away, by like incredible forces beyond their control. Like they mentioned Rose in this episode, she's trapped in a parallel world. Donna has her mind wiped. Martha leaves because her family have all been like tortured and traumatized for a year, and she kind of needs to hang out with them, and because she's in love with the Doctor.
and because the Doctor is just like, he's just totally blanking like all the hints she's been dropping. So he's just like, what? I can't do this anymore.
Yeah, she was just practicing some self-care,
Yeah.
Whereas Ryan's just a bit bored. That's not entirely true, but basically Ryan's kind of decided to take it upon himself to look after planet Earth, and he's decided that he kind of just doesn't really want to do it anymore. And I think it's quite harsh. I think you said this as well, because Graham is clearly quite happy to keep traveling, but then when Ryan isn't, he's like, "Oh no, it's fine. I won't either. I'll just give up on my," what was it you said, my second lease of life, and my adventures to go and hang out.
The Doctor literally says, like, "Where are we going next?" And Graham's like, yeah. Like, he's well up for it. And then Ryan essentially emotionally blackmails him into staying, because he's like, "Well, I don't want to leave my grandson with whom I've just rebuilt this relationship. So I guess I'll go too." I do think, like, the scene you mentioned between Ryan and the Doctor about midway through the episode in the TARDIS, I thought was a really nice scene. Again, it's like Tosin gets to show what he can do, much like it with the scene with his wayward dad in Resolution. And it's quite a long scene. It's a bit sort of an opportunity to kind of breathe out a little bit in the middle of the episode, which I think it needed. And I think without that scene, Ryan's exit would have felt way too abrupt. Whereas you kind of, even if you didn't know it was coming, by that point you would have known it was coming because the seeds are sown. And I think that's nice. I think I said this to you, like I do think it would have worked better if it didn't feel like the first time the Doctor and Ryan had ever had a one-to-one conversation. Which I'm sure it's not, but it kind of feels like that. I think we've said before that definitely of the three companions, the Doctor and Ryan's relationship has always felt the most, the least developed. So when they're suddenly having this big one-to-one, I'm like, this is great. We should have had more of this. And then this scene, which is really good, would have had even more impact. But you do get that nice scene in this episode. You get a nice build up to Ryan's exit, and then Graham doesn't really get a lot to do in this episode. Not only does he not have as solid a reason for leaving the TARDIS, but he doesn't loom as large as Ryan. He doesn't get the big heart to heart. He just sort of it feels like his exit is just sort of part and parcel of Ryan's, rather than him having a real motive for stepping off the TARDIS himself.
I think you're definitely right. It feels like a Ryan exit episode that Graham happens to leave in as well.
Yeah.
And to be honest, part of me wondered whether that was a hint, and I might be reading too much into this, but whether that was a hint that we could see, Bradley Walsh again. I will say Bradley Walsh seems much more, since obviously both actors have left the series, but Bradley Walsh has done a lot more of the post-show press and things like that. As Tosin Cole's off on his next job, he's been filming, so he's been too busy. But Bradley Walsh does seem quite happy to kind of keep chatting Doctor Who and doing things like that. So I do wonder whether maybe, he also did Comic-Con, so I do wonder whether he's maybe a little bit more inclined to, schedule allowing, pop back for a little guest role. If they ever land on Earth, maybe Graham will be like, oh yeah, Ryan's on holiday with his mates, but I can help out. Do you know what I mean? That kind of thing.
Yeah. No, I would like that, because like I say, I do feel like Ryan kind of reached, he had that kind of dramatic release, it makes sense, his exit, whereas Graham is just kind of along for the ride. So I don't feel like the show is done with Graham in the same way as it's done with Ryan.
Definitely.
So I'd definitely be open for a Bradley Walsh comeback. Always love a bit of Bradders.
Definitely. I did find I think I found that last moment where the Doctor kind of pulls them in, the four of them kind of, push their heads together. I found that was quite a sweet moment, because they have very much been a foursome. I will definitely say that. Like, they've been a gang, and it's sort of, weirdly, it's sort of sadder in a way than some companion exits, because that's like the Doctor loses a friend and kind of, we'll go and find another one. With this one, it's like not exactly a family, but they call it the family. It kind of breaks up, they kind of go their separate ways. And the fact that Yaz keeps traveling with the Doctor sort of makes it a bit sadder. Like, it's kind of like a diminished version. That said, I do think that it's a sort of weird message to send, because it's basically the episode ends with Yaz and the Doctor depressed and alone in the TARDIS, essentially being, well, this isn't going to be as good, is it? And it's like, coming 2021.
Yeah. I mean, this episode definitely, like, it as we said, it touches on Yaz's relationship with the Doctor and what that dynamic is. But I think I am excited for the next series in terms of how it's going to go back to being, a one well, there's always one Doctor. Well, not always, but how it's going to be, the Doctor and one companion dynamic. And we're going to really get to kind of drill down into that relationship. I'm excited for that. But you're right in that this ends on a slightly odd note of like, oh, we're sad that they've left. This isn't going to be as good. And then meanwhile, Graham and Ryan on Earth are having a great time. They're going to be they're going to be sort of like private eyes with psychic paper, taking on gravel monsters in quarries and learning to ride bikes and hanging out with Ghost Grace. They're having a great time.
Yeah. I do find it nice that they kind of, they kind of finish the episode where they started. They're on that hill, they're learning to ride the bike. We have that nice little cameo from Grace, which I was wondering whether they actually got Sharon D. Clark to record that, or whether they just used a bit of archive footage. I'm not sure.
I think it's new. New.
But they kind of have that moment, they have that thing together. I did find it quite funny that the Doctor gives them both psychic paper, which is like quite useful, but not like, oh, we're fighting these gravel monsters, I'm from the CIA. It's sort of useful to get in, but then I'm like, what would Ryan and Graham do confronted by like a 70-foot gravel monster? They're going to be like, where's the laser? Graham's got his laser shoes out, if he kept those.
Yeah, that would be a short spin-off, unless that is what the Doctor really should have gifted Graham, is his laser shoes, and he would once again bust out the soft shoe shuffle. I
feel like he gave, when he was David Tennant, they gave Sarah Jane K9, a little sonic lipstick, a few different things. Whereas they just get some psychic paper the Doctor had lying around.
Spare bits of psychic paper. I've got loads. I have two.
Yeah, no, but I do think it's kind of interesting to see. There's a thing that people say about Doctor Who, especially modern Doctor Who, where like every companion basically becomes the Doctor. That's kind of what happens, especially in the Russell T Davies era. They kind of when you meet them again, especially, they've kind of become a version of a Doctor. And that happens as well. Like, I think Stephen Moffat said, actually, it's like they become a professional version of what the Doctor is an amateur of. Like, Clara's oft, an immortal traveling through space and time in a TARDIS. Bill is, also kind of an immortal star being flying around. You've got, maybe not Amy and Rory so much, but, you've got Billy Piper as Rose, fighting for the good fight in the parallel world, all that stuff. Yeah, Freema Agyeman working for UNIT, like Martha, also known as. Yeah, so it's kind of interesting. It's kind of interesting to see that approach with Graham and Ryan, because like I would not, I would be a bit worried if they're the new UNIT's been shut down, Torchwood's gone. It's never fear. Graham and Ryan are gonna take a 16-hour flight to Korea to have a look at something.
Yeah,
it's nice. It's a nice way to sort of say the journey has changed them, and they're not just going to go back to things as they are. But it's interesting. I would be interested to see if we see anything more of them, like whether we see more of Graham, because they've just left to kind of go back to present day Sheffield, which is where Yaz is still from. That's kind of unusual to still have that like connection with a companion who remains in the TARDIS, at least in the modern series. So I'm kind of interested in how they go. But yeah, I don't know. I think overall, I think it worked as an exit episode. It was a funny image that the last shot of the episode is the camera pans out, the sort of romantic music swells, and Ryan just falls off his bike.
Yeah, I know. Could they not have cut the episode off like a few seconds earlier and just been like, yeah, okay, we know. I know the point is that Ryan, this isn't going to be easy. It's going to be a struggle for him to learn to ride this bike, but he will overcome because he's got this newfound kind of strength and vigor. But ultimately, the last thing we ever see of Ryan Sinclair in Doctor Who, possibly ever, is him falling off his bike again. And it would have just been nice to see him literally ride off into the sunset, rather than the final shot is him falling over and Graham sort of rushing to his side like, oh, you're all right. But yeah, no, I think for me, because as we said, there's a lot going on in this episode. Some works, some of it works, some of it doesn't. For me, what works best is the interpersonal dynamics between the TARDIS crew and the exit of, or maybe not so much Graham, but definitely Ryan's exit and the way in which that's played. That's the stuff that works for me. I think there's good and bad with Jack's appearance, likewise with the Daleks. But I think apart from the fact that maybe Graham is slightly underserved, which could be remedied if he comes back, I think the relationships between the fam and the way in which Ryan's exit in particular plays out, that's the stuff I'll sort of take away from this episode. Definitely,
yeah. And it's interesting. It felt like, because we watched Resolution, really, it was a real contrast with Resolution, which kind of was all about the action and the kind of drive of the story. I think, it's kind of interesting because Christian said in an interview that, this obviously was filmed before the pandemic. There are no pandemic references in it. There's no kind of nod to coronavirus at all, really, which is quite a nice bit of escapism. But he did say, the episode kind of seemed more appropriate as the year went on. And I did think that's true, because it's about people obviously not being able to see each other, and it's about connection and connections that you lose, and like that, how things change and how much you can change, if your life is put in a different direction. And, like you say, I think all the different bits of the episode for me work quite well individually. Like, I thought Jack was really good. It was like he'd kind of just wandered back on in 2007, the way he was acting, like, and him sort of treating it the same kind of helps sell it, that it's the same people, or the same Doctor anyway, and the same Jack, even if obviously at least one of those characters has been recast. And then on the other side of it, like, I thought the way the Daleks worked was pretty cool, and I thought Chris Noth was really good, and I thought the interpersonal dynamics were really good. I think sometimes the way in which those things interacted didn't quite mesh in the way I'd like it to. Like I'm like, the prison stuff, I can see how you could have maybe extended that a bit longer, like, a bit like David Tennant in the Christmas Invasion, a bit more of a gap. I feel like maybe you could have, made the Daleks slightly more of a focus. Maybe you could have done this, maybe you could have done that. But there's a lot to do in this episode, and it's one of the longest Doctor Who episodes for a long time anyway. It's 70 minutes. It doesn't feel that long. And I think I've rewatched it a little bit, and I think I preferred it on the second watch once I kind of knew what I was getting. Do you know what I mean? Because it's not the most upbeat episode either. It's quite a downbeat episode, which I think would have been fine normally. But I think maybe people who were kind of coming for like, woohoo, yeah, Doctor Who Adventure might be a bit like, oh, everyone's left.
I think that's often the case with Doctor Who, especially these big episodes where whether it's a Dalek episode or the first episode back in a long while, which this one is, or a companion exit episode or a Doctor exit episode. You always kind of build them up, and then they can't possibly match or be exactly what you expected. So often I find I enjoy them more on a second watch, and I've only watched this episode once, and I think for me on the first watch, my immediate takeaways were that I agree with you. I liked a lot of what was happening in isolation. There were a lot of strong ingredients, didn't come together quite for me. So it wasn't quite the parts didn't quite come together, didn't quite mesh as neatly as I would have liked. So it's kind of like a solid 3-star for me, rather than an episode that blew me away. But there were parts of it that I really liked.
Yeah, I think I'd agree. Like, that's kind of how I felt with it. And there were definitely some like one-liners and stuff that really had me laughing, and some bits that I was like, oh yeah, I'll definitely remember that. But yeah, I mean, and I'm quite interested to see where they go next. It's a shame that we're putting have to wait a really long time, because I feel like I would quite like it. Kind of got me in the mood to watch more Doctor Who, if you know what I mean. And I am quite interested to see how the Yaz Doctor dynamic goes. But yeah, so that's our kind of instant-ish review for Revolution of the Daleks. What did you think, listeners at home? We were aware this is an extended episode, but if you're still listening, please do let us know in the comments what you thought of the episode. Was it better or worse than any recent ones? Anything you would like to see different? Any bits you particularly loved? And whatever you think about the upcoming series, and how it's going to focus on the Doctor and Yaz, and whether you were emotionally moved by Ryan falling off his bike again in the final shots of the episode. Oh, and please, somebody, please let me know if you also noticed that the last words of the episode were "You're doing it, mate." A classic line from Graham.
Yeah, which they may have added on in ADR. I'm not sure, but I'm so glad they did. That Graham's final line is "You're doing it, mate," which is absolutely I think the most iconic Graham line. So
it's absolutely iconic. That, and we don't get aliens in Sheffield. So yeah, basically, thanks for listening. We'll be back with more Doctor Who podcast fun in the rest of the new year. We'll be back on Wednesdays from here on out. So we've been jumping around a bit to accommodate various embargoes and this episode.
I mean, no one knows what day it is over Christmas anyway.
That's true. If you want to read more about the episode, we've got loads of content on radiotimes.com and more coming out over the weekend. Loads of behind the scenes kind of chats and things like that. And yeah, should be loads of good stuff. Anyway, until next time, I've been Hugh.
I've been Morgan.
And this has been our first and possibly last Doctor Who review of 2021. So I hope you enjoyed it. Goodbye.